Well, less than a month after the last Australian troops left Afghanistan, the threat posed by Islamist terrorists here on home soil is growing. According to the Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews, Australians must once again prepare to confront the spectre of terrorism fuelled by the rise of the so-called dark web. She's proposing new powers be handed to law enforcement and courts to help keep convicted terrorists behind bars and more closely monitor suspected terrorists living in the community to prevent an Auckland-style attack. Minister Andrews joins me now. Thank you for your time, Minister. This issue, I don't think, is going to go away. I think it'll be a spectre of our lives for many years to come. But how much worse has it got since the Taliban swept to power only weeks ago?
Well, good evening, Peter. The current situation in which we find ourselves is clearly concerning. The threat level in Australia has been at probable since 2014, but we now have a series of unknowns in terms of what their implications could well be. So clearly we've had the issues with Afghanistan. We are watching to see how the Taliban will react. We're watching to see what the flow-on implications of that. We've already seen one incident in Auckland where only a week or so ago an ISIS-inspired terrorist who had been watching what had been happening in Afghanistan went crazy pretty much at a supermarket, and 7 people were injured. Some of those people were quite seriously injured before he was shot and killed by the police. So we know that he was inspired firstly by ISIS, but had been closely monitoring what had been happening in Afghanistan. We also know that during COVID, particularly over the last 12 months or so, people have had more time at home. They've had more time to access content online that they shouldn't be accessing, and that has led to increased radicalisation. So we're in a situation now where it's unclear, but we know that the risk continues to be probable, and there are these unknowns sitting there, which means that we cannot be complacent. The government is certainly not complacent, and we need to make sure that we are doing all that we can to give the resources to our intelligence and law enforcement agencies, and that we're making it very clear to the Australian public that the threat of terrorism is not gone. It continues.
Talk to me about the dark web. I'll get to the terrorists we know, known convicted terrorists in jail at the moment in just a minute, but the dark web, the radicalisation, that was a big issue around the first wave of the Islamic State, 2013, 2015, that period. It appears to be back. We know the bloke in Auckland had been in prison, was out of prison. He was under watch from security agencies. That's got to be a concern as well. Talk to me about the changes you want to see or the powers you think are needed in relation to the dark web.
Yes, so nothing good ever happens on the dark web. It's a place where weapons are traded, drugs are traded, child sex abuse happens. Some of that's live child sex abuse, but there are opportunities for people to access material that will lead them on a radicalisation pathway. So just recently we passed legislation through the Parliament that would give additional powers to our law enforcement agencies, so the AFP and also the ACIC, to start to disrupt, to intercept and disrupt some of the things that were happening potentially on the dark web, and a lot of that was done through the Anom app where we worked very closely with the FBI. But what these new powers will actually do is enable our AFP and the ACIC to actually access the accounts of these people who we believe are at risk of seriously offending. So the AFP, for example, would be able to access these accounts. Now, the current situation is that if the police need to access an account, they actually have to ask the alleged criminal for their username and password. Now, these powers mean that the police will actually be able to step in and they will be able to access those accounts, and they will be able to look not only at what that individual is doing, but who they are associating with, which is a key part of us being able to uncover the networks that are happening out there. So not just a single individual, but the networks that are out there. Now, there are safeguards in place. So most of the powers require warrants to be able to go in and access the information to disrupt, to intercept. But this is very critical powers for the AFP and the ACIC to disrupt the activity that is going on, particularly in relation to terrorism.
Yeah, look, I just have to underscore for people at home, the warrant powers that you're seeking for the online world are the very same warrant powers that already exist in relation to telephony, to mobile phones and landlines. So this is an extension, I guess, of where we are in the digital world. Talk to me, Minister. 51 terrorists are currently in Australian jail. What can be done to keep them behind bars?
Okay, so we do have continuing detention orders so that we can, when we know these people are coming out, we can make applications to courts for these individuals to stay behind bars. In the event that we are unsuccessful, we are looking at legislation. It's been introduced into the House now, which would give us extended supervision orders, which means that when these people come out of jail, we will be able to put in place some very targeted and tailored supervision orders. So that can go to where the individual can go. We can ask them to demonstrate and prepare information that says, this is where I'm going to be at such and such a time. We can control that. We can make that person currently, check in with the AFP. We can make sure that they are doing things such as not being able to access online content. So we can actually be very specific depending on what the individual has been incarcerated for. So these are very important powers for us. So if we can, we will look at ways to keep these prisoners behind bars, but in the event that they do come out into the community, and they will be starting to come out potentially in the next couple of years, we need to be able to control their activities so that they are not a risk to the public. We don't want an Auckland situation here.
No, we don't. I've got to ask you before I go, Minister, your former colleague, Peter Dutton, or he's still a colleague, but the former incumbent of that portfolio, he strongly supported a national child protection register. The register would name convicted child pedophiles. We would know where they reside, in what communities they reside. Supported by Bruce Morecambe and the Morecambe Foundation. Some support in states and territories, not all. Not your home state of Queensland in particular. Is that still on the table for you as Minister?
Look, it remains on the table. The issue for us to be able to bring that to fruition is to get the states and, the states in particular on board. And as you just said, not all of the states are prepared to hand over the information to put that on a register, which is very, very disappointing. But without that information, we would only have pretty much a half a register. So, yes, I will continue to pursue that. I think it's something that we need to do, but it does involve the states in particular coming on board.
And just before we go, this is your first time in a security portfolio. You're not long in the job, but you've been there long enough to have your feet under the desk and get a sense of it. How have you found the portfolio?
Well, Home Affairs is a huge portfolio, so there are a lot of parts to it. My sole focus at the moment is to keep Australians safe and secure. So that's why I'm focusing on counter-terrorism initiatives, why I'm making sure that our intelligence and law enforcement agencies are well resourced. That will continue to be a focus. But I'm also on the record of saying that my number one priority is cyber, because we know that that actually infiltrates all of the work that we do across Home Affairs. So cyber is my number one priority. We'll be looking at a range of things going forward, particularly ransomware attacks. But the dark web, keeping people off that, or being able to prosecute people who have accessed things that they should not be accessing, is front of mind.
Karen Andrews, thank you for your time.
Pleasure.